All right, we rolling. Let's jam. It's Freedom Phil. Like, subscribe. Let's get into it. And today's topic's going to be I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of the people that talk about, yeah, for instance, the boomers and this and how you were set up for failure. Like, I did that video talking about your life is basically planned in reverse. And I noticed the one consistent thing in all these big videos and the pleasant faces of the people, the smiley, happy people, they always avoid the things that'll actually get you out of poverty. And what I say, I know that what I'm proposing, I'm a radical. I'm not a revolutionary, but what I'm proposing is so out of the mainstream that most of you couldn't. They're like, no, never. And maybe that's why most of you are still stuck in the same damn hamster wheel you've always been stuck in. Where am I going with this? Freedom Phil, like, subscribe. Let's get into it. Always turn up the video speed. Why do I always say that? Because, dude, seriously, you can watch videos faster. And as I always say, this is not a channel for children, even though children could benefit from knowing this knowledge. I swear, I cuss, I talk about real things, and frankly, a lot of you are shitty parents just letting your kids watch anything on the internet. Yeah, let's get into it. I thought about this earlier when I was listening to this guy, this like 40-minute video, and I turned it up to 2 times the speed because for whatever reason my usual downloader isn't allowing me to convert things to MP3s. It has this pop-up ad, and I'm like, I'm not touching that. I know how shit works. I'm like, no, not trying it. And all the downloaders have the same fucking problem. I'm like, oh, look, it's one of those people. Fuck you. So I gotta watch it the slow speeds of 2 times the speed. But this guy starts off and he's talking about, well, see the cost of living and you just can't get anywhere. Most of the wealth is concentrated in the upper percent. Is there ever a thought in anybody's head that you could have done something just a little bit different? Because nobody told me this when I was younger. Like when I lived out in the woods in my early 20s, paying $100 a month for my piece of land, and I built my own homemade yurt, the original house of sticks, I got a lot of shit for that. And it's like, people say women are horrifically affected by the herd mentality. Whoa, what do women want? What other women want? But men do it too. What do men want? Whatever gets them pussy. That's it. And so you run into these situations where it's like, I just remember this line my buddy said. At that point, I'd lived in my house for a while, and I was working 2 jobs. I was working a dishwashing job in the meat plant that I cleaned up. And I worked every day. And I had extra money. This is early 2000s, like right after, basically 2000. But it was like, it was maybe a year before 9/11. I just remember thinking to myself, I'm like, what is the fucking point of all this? And the only thing I really wanted at that point was to get another Siberian Husky because I'd given away my Siberian Husky to be responsible because I couldn't afford rent and afford a place that could have a Husky. So it's either I live in this little tiny bungalow for $300 a month, but I can't have a dog, or I'm homeless. And at first I was going to live out in the woods, but I didn't have the metal for it. And what ended up happening is the second time I went out there, at this point I'd already got the pup, and I'm like, well, this is it. It was like having a kid. Now this is here. Now this is part of my life. Now I can't just walk away from this. So fuck it. We're doing it. There are things in my life that made me just a little harder, a little more wild than most of you will ever be. Most of you are domesticated to the point of failure. And when I did that video saying, well, your life in reverse and as planned, your failure is as planned, I wasn't kidding. Did it ever occur to any of you when you're working some regular job or some low paying, you're in the low scale, the trades, you're going through college, could you just maybe rent someone's backyard if you're in a warm enough climate and get a tent? Could you get like an old RV or some sort of little camper trailer? Could you do that long enough to where you're saving enough money working your job or doing whatever, or you're not getting screwed on the cost of, you're doing at-home education? Clary's talked about this occasionally where he says, hey man, one of the best things he ever did was, being a security guard. And people are like, security guard? Yeah, because in the time that he was sitting there at night, he could actually go out and write his books. I've seen people who do the security guard thing and they live as cheap as possible. I once met a guy who did the van life thing with the security guard thing, and he was doing online education. So he was getting an education while he was at work. Getting paid and paying basically no rent. That guy was a complete radical. There was another guy in my hometown. He was a genius computer guy. he did his first 2 years at the local community college, and then he had to go over and finish over someplace over near Seattle, Libya. I don't remember. And he lived down in one of the valleys. We had a lot of these like tree. It's the Northwest, so it's trees and creeks. He lived just down near the creek in his tent. He had a setup, and he was saving a grip of money by not paying for housing. And he did that. Now, I don't know how he pulled it off when he went to the next place, but I can tell you this. When he went to the next part of his 2-year education, to have the 4-year education for his tech job, he basically had that much extra money in his pocket to work with, which is more than all of you have. No, all the tech guys aren't doing so well. Like, you know what? Yeah, but we're talking the early 2000s, okay? So he got his degree, and he went through when things were building up. Occasionally there's a fall, building up. That guy's a multimillionaire now. The fact is that yes, you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps to a certain degree, but if you try to live the same way that the previous generations do, where you're paying for a rental, like a normal rental situation, and let's be honest, ladies, ladies, you could do this, but you never will. Just like most ladies that are truckers, they're truckers after they've raised their kids, and their dad was a trucker, maybe they rode in the truck with pops. Maybe they had a boyfriend that was a trucker, and they're like, hey, I can do this. And they look back at their hometown and are like, well, shit, why should I pay rent there? I can come back and visit my friends here and there on the weekends. Most ladies cannot handle that level of adversity, not because they can't handle it, but because society will insulate you from it. But guys, let's be honest, the reason you will do most of the fucking stupid decisions you make, well, it's because pussy. And so you'll pay that rent, you'll pay that mortgage, you'll pay all this crap on, payment plans, 30-year mortgages, credit cards, all this crap. And the problem with this is that your money, a fool and his money are soon parted. That's just how it is. And she can be with you for a while. And if you fail, there's always next dope down the line. Let's look at the most attractive dopes that are going to pay my bills. Now, at any given point, what actually spurred this conversation, I don't know if I mentioned it yet, as a buddy of mine, when I moved out to the woods, and I was dead set on moving out in the woods, and the reason why I was like, fuck it. I mean, I got really high, some pretty good weed, dibbity-dank weed, watched Princess Mononoke, and I was looking at the lights of the city and thinking, why the hell do I live like this reality? This is wrong. Not the city, not all that, but the idea that the only, like, you born, you go to elementary, middle school, high school, and then you get puked out into society with basically no skills, get a job or go to college, go to military. Like, where's the you? Where's the planning in this? And I'm like, I don't need any of this shit. And that was when, at the same time, I was actually reading these books about these Native American conical lodges in this book, and the way they described them, like, I could build that. And I remember my buddy saying, dude, if you move out in the woods and live in a tent, no woman's going to want to bang a guy who lives in a tent. And let me tell you, by the way, ladies, you could have prevented me from probably being as wild and crazy as I am if you had just given up the pussy back then. There were girls that were interested in me. But then after I moved out of the woods, well, when are you going to grow up? Peter Pan syndrome. I'm like, no, I'm just doing what I'm doing. I'm not telling anybody else to do what I do. I'm just saying what I'm doing is working. I only make this much. I only made like $300 a week, $200 to $300 a week back then, working at cleaning up the meat plant. Okay. But I had, like, all my friends were broke, and I had an extra $1,000 to $2,000 in the bank. Now, if I had had that same mentality of live as cheap as possible, by the way, boomers, Gen Xers, these kids are lazy. Well, why don't you let somebody set up a trailer? If you know a good kid, why don't you let them set up a trailer in your backyard? You got a back 40? Hell, here's the thing. What if you got a property and you know the kid's a good kid, they're not a fuck up, and you're gone most of the time? They could be basically the security guard for it, to keep an eye on your property so fuckos don't show up. Why don't you do this? Well, nobody helped me, and I turned out, well, it was a different era there, Gramps. Boomer McGramps. It's a different era, just like, and by the way, this is why, this is why I have a lot of disdain for the older generations, because it used to be that you would try to build a better world for the next generation. And most people will try to do that for their own family, almost to a detriment, by the way. I've seen a lot of times where kids are spared the lessons they need to be successful. They are like, I've seen this. I'm not going to name names or families or people or friends, but I've seen families where you have the situation where the father's a plumber or an electrician or something or other. And the kids, you're like, what are you doing today on the weekend? Oh, we're just staring at the switch. Why don't you learn? The guys over here, I don't want to. Wow, you're sure going to be useful. And you want to know how I know that's a plan for failure? Because I was that kid. But I never had. In fact, I always say, fuck that. I was interested in weird stuff like that when I was a kid, but I didn't have anybody around me. So my option was, well, fuck it, I'll just play video games. And by the way, I had fun playing video games. But the point of it is that if you've got these kids, you need to get them out there and start training them. You need to get them to where they're learning the accounting, they're learning the compound interest, they're learning some sort of trade, they're learning nursing, they're learning something when they're young. And when you're a kid, when you're 16, 20 something, it's perfectly fine to live with your parents if you're saving money so you can pay cash for something. Like you buy a house cash in the Midwest or something. Or you're able to self-fund your schooling. By the way, here's another trick. If the government's going to tax you in an onerous way, feel perfectly fine with taking their money if you never have to pay it back. If you never have to pay it back and it's a grant, take the money. Why? Because when you get out there and you start making money, they're going to take your money. It's only fair. They invest in you, and you pay back when you work. You're putting money back into them. You're paying dividends via your taxation, your increased tax amount into the system. But that's the thing. What I propose is radical, and I would say be willing to live in a tent. Be willing to live in a trailer. Be willing to live a bunch of bunk beds in a house. By the way, you keep that rent paid, that lawn mowed, you keep that landlord good and happy. You even put some flowers up and you make that place look good. It doesn't look like a fucking flop house. You don't have a bunch of bullshit cars in front of the place. You make that place look nice to where that landlord's like, yeah, there's like 10 guys living there in a 3-bedroom, but they've never given me any trouble. They even fixed a problem that they caused. And, you make that house as basically a monastery. You don't bring no drama. And if look, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a girlfriend, but let's be honest. If your girlfriend is the reason that holds your girlfriend or your wife or whoever is the reason you're paying out an absurd amount of money to rent a place, pay utilities, and do all that shit, buddy, you're pimping yourself. Like you can't be mad at a prostitute for charging like $500 to $1,000 if you're paying some bitch's rent who's bitching, we need more, we need better furniture, we need it. You're pimping yourself, son. And I'm saying, be willing to be a little weird and a little radical. Be willing to do things differently in order to get the results. Because if most of your money just goes up in smoke for rent or a mortgage or a car payment, be willing to drive an old car. If most of your money goes up in smoke for those reasons, well, shit, you played yourself. You could try to blame the 1%. You could try to blame Bezos, but let me give you a number. It wasn't like I couldn't have earned 60 to 80,000 back in the early 2000s. If I got into trucking when I was a lot younger, I could have been making 60 to 80,000. Here's a trick for you. Go up and look up what gold was worth per ounce in the year 2000. And look up, just take 100,000 and divide that, how many ounces of gold that is. And then to today, 25 years later, look at how much it's worth today and look at that number. There was nothing stopping me, there was nothing stopping my friends, and there's nothing stopping you from doing that same technique when it comes to money, investing, and everything else. But if you're not willing to do it, can we please stop with this whole thing of the system? Like, I have a huge amount of disdain for the boomers and the older Gen Xers for what they've basically done. But at the end of the day, you can't blame it all on them. So anyways, my coffee water's boiling. Y'all have a great day. Peace. Remember, get a tent, be radical. Get a trailer, be radical. Get a van, be radical. Live in a truck. Live in whatever way you can live cheap. And, save that money. Because that money will allow you to retire younger. The investments when you're young allows you to retire when you're young. Peace.